Start with the Bible. Stay with the Bible. I am Mr. Batman, the Dark Knight of Logic, and we are making the kingdom great again by keeping the commandments of Yahweh and teaching others to do the same. Welcome to BioLogos Academy. I am the Dark Knight of Logic, and today we are stepping into the dissection room to examine the greatest courtroom drama in human history: the trial, the accusations, and the absolute legality of the Messiah, Yeshua. We are going to look at the historical record, but before we examine a single piece of evidence, we must establish our foundation. As a former debate teacher, I see people making the same fatal error over and over again when they approach the scriptures. They try to argue from neutral ground. They try to judge the actions of Yeshua, the accounts of the Brit Hadashah, and the history of the Tanakh by the arbitrary, shifting, vacuous standards of modern secularism. Let me be perfectly clear. There is no neutral ground. None. Knowledge, logic, and science itself are impossible and absolutely cannot be justified without the existence of the Creator, Yahweh. When a skeptic or a scoffer tries to put the Bible on trial, I stop them immediately and ask the only question that matters. By what standard? By what standard are you evaluating truth? Without the Creator, your logic is just chemical fizz in an evolved brain. But we know better. We look at the universe through the lens of irreducible complexity, and we see the undeniable fingerprint of the Almighty. Therefore, our standard is not human opinion. Our standard is the eternal, unchanging word of Yahweh. Today's question cuts right to the heart of biblical jurisprudence. Why didn't the Pharisees and Sadducees, the supposed experts in the law, use the Deuteronomy 13 or 18 test to legally disqualify Yeshua? I will answer that question with a question. Did they not try? And more importantly, by what standard were they actually judging him? Let's open the scroll and dissect this using the very laws of Yahweh. Let us look at Deuteronomy 18. Moses, the great lawgiver, prophesied that Yahweh would raise up a prophet like him from among their brothers. What was the defining characteristic of this coming prophet? Yahweh said, I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak unto them all that I shall command him. Now, examine the historical record of the Brit Hadashah. What did Yeshua constantly, repeatedly claim? Did he claim to be a rogue innovator, starting a new religion? Did he claim to be replacing the Torah with a lawless system of mere mental assent? Look at John 8:28. Yeshua declares, I do nothing on my own, but speak just what the Father has taught me. He was actively claiming the Deuteronomy 18 mantle. His actions aligned perfectly with the words of Yahweh. Every word he spoke, every miracle he performed, miracles of irreducible complexity that defied the natural order, was a direct demonstration of the Father's authority. But wait, the skeptics and the religious hypocrites of his day pushed back. They tried to frame him as a deceiver. So we must turn to the ultimate test, Deuteronomy chapter 13. Deuteronomy 13 explicitly defines a false prophet. It states that even if a dreamer of dreams produces signs and wonders, if he says, let us go after other gods and let us serve them, he is a false prophet. The judgment for that is death. So I ask you, and I want you to think logically about this. Do not just regurgitate what you heard in Sunday school. Did Yeshua ever, in his entire earthly ministry, instruct a single person to worship anyone other than Yahweh? Did he ever tell anyone to abandon the Torah? The answer is an emphatic, mathematically absolute no. Listen to his words in Matthew 5. He told the crowds and his disciples that not one jot or one tittle would pass from the law until heaven and earth pass away. He pointed everyone directly back to the Father and the Father's instructions. Remember, we must define terms correctly. What is sin? 1 John 3:4 defines sin strictly as lawlessness. It is the rejection of Yahweh's Torah. If Yeshua taught people to break the Torah, he would be teaching lawlessness. He would be a sinner, but he did not. He passed the Deuteronomy 13 test with absolute terrifying perfection. Now, let that sink in. Let the logic of the situation wash over you. If they couldn't convict him of breaking the written Torah, what were the Pharisees actually furious about? Were they defending the law of Yahweh, or were they defending the traditions of the elders? When they accused Yeshua of breaking the Sabbath, like when he healed a man with a withered hand, restoring the irreducible complexity of human biology in an instant, were those actual violations of Yahweh's written commands, or were they violations of the Pharisees' man-made fences, their oral law? Yeshua did not break the Torah. He took a sledgehammer to their unbiblical additions to it. He exposed their logical contradictions. He rebuked them to their faces, asking them, "Why do you break the commandment of Elohim for the sake of your tradition?" That is Matthew 15:3. He didn't come to abolish the law. He came to abolish the false, man-made interpretations that had enslaved the people. Look at the record of his illegal nighttime trial. Matthew 26, verses 59 to 60, tells us the chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for false evidence against Yeshua so they could put him to death. But they did not find any, though many false witnesses came forward. Apply your logic. Use the brain Yahweh gave you. If Yeshua had actually violated Deuteronomy 13 or 18, they wouldn't have needed false witnesses, would they? If he was a Torah breaker, they could have simply opened the scroll of Moses, pointed to his actions, and executed him legally, according to the Torah. The fact that they had to fabricate charges in the middle of the night, the fact that they had to rely on the pagan empire of Rome to execute him, proves definitively that the true experts of the law knew they had no biblical case. They didn't use Deuteronomy 13 and 18 to disprove him because those very chapters proved him. His perfect obedience exposed their hypocrisy, their lawlessness, and their shifting standards. And since they could not defeat him with logic, since they could not defeat him with the scriptures, they resorted to murder. But the grave could not hold the true word of life. The ultimate verdict is this: Yeshua is exactly who he claimed to be. He is the prophet like Moses. He is the living embodiment of the Torah. You cannot have the Messiah while rejecting the Father's law, because to reject the Torah is to embrace lawlessness. And Yeshua will say to the lawless in the end, "Depart from me, I never knew you." We don't argue from neutral ground here. We stand on the rock of the Word. In our next lesson, we will dive deeper into the specific man-made fences Yeshua destroyed, and how we today must tear down the traditions of men to walk in the true Hebraic roots of our faith. Visit biologosacademy.com for more Torah Bible resources. Making the Kingdom Great Again, Matthew 5:19. Start with the Bible. Stay with the Bible. I am Mr. Batman, the Dark Knight of Logic, and we are making the kingdom great again by keeping the commandments of Yahweh and teaching others to do the same. Welcome back to BioLogos Academy. I am the Dark Knight of Logic. In our last session, we proved beyond the shadow of a mathematical doubt that Yeshua passed the Deuteronomy tests for a true prophet with absolute perfection. He pointed the people directly to the Torah of Yahweh. So we are forced to ask a logical question. Why did the religious elite, the Pharisees and Sadducees, hate him so much? If he was keeping the law perfectly, what was the actual conflict? To answer that, we have to look at their foundation. I ask you, by what standard were they operating? They were not operating from the Tanakh. They had abandoned the Creator's absolute standard for a shifting evolutionary system of their own making. Let me remind you, whether you are an atheist troll on the internet or a first century Pharisee, the principle is the same. Knowledge, logic, and truth absolutely cannot be justified without the existence and the authority of Yahweh. When you abandon His word, your logic collapses into absurdity. A lot of modern theologians, who frankly wouldn't pass a basic freshman debate class, will tell you that Yeshua came to do away with the law. They claim he came to replace the harsh rules of the Tanakh with some vague, lawless concept of grace. I ask you, does that even make logical sense? The Creator, whose design shows staggering, irreducible complexity from the orbit of the planets to the inner workings of a single cell, suddenly changes his mind? Suddenly decides his perfect instructions are obsolete? Absolutely not. The conflict in the Brit Hadashah was never Yeshua versus the Torah. It was Yeshua versus the Takanot, the man-made traditions, the oral law. We must define our terms. What is sin? 1 John 3:4 defines it strictly. Sin is lawlessness. It is the rejection of Yahweh's Torah. If Yeshua broke the Torah, he sinned. If he sinned, he cannot be the Messiah. But Yeshua did not break the Torah. He broke their made-up rules. Let's examine the ultimate battleground, the Sabbath. Read the accounts. They constantly accused him of breaking the Sabbath. But did he? When Yeshua healed a man with a withered hand, restoring the irreducible complexity of a human limb in a fraction of a second, the Pharisees wanted to kill him. I challenge anyone. Show me chapter and verse in the written Tanakh where healing a man violates the Sabbath. You can't, because it isn't there. You know what Yeshua violated? Their unbiblical fences. The Pharisees had invented over 500 ridiculous man-made rules regarding the Sabbath. Rules about how far you could walk, what you could carry, whether you could heal. They had taken a day designed for rest and communion with the Creator and turned it into an oppressive burden of legalism. Yeshua looked at these hypocrites who were entirely blind to the miraculous reality in front of them, and he rebuked them. He wasn't destroying the Sabbath. He was restoring it to its original perfect design. In Matthew 23, Yeshua talks about the seat of Moses. The Pharisees claimed the authority to sit in that seat and mandate new laws, demanding the people obey their traditions as if they were handed down at Sinai. They were directly violating Deuteronomy 4:2, which commands us neither to add to nor subtract from the word. I ask you, how can finite, fallible men claim the authority to override the infinite Creator? They cannot. That is exactly why Yeshua blasted them in Matthew 15:3. He looked them dead in the eye and asked, "Why do you break the commandment of Elohim for the sake of your tradition?" He exposed their logical contradictions. He proved that they cared more about maintaining their religious control and their theological monopolies than they cared about the truth. They traded the true word of life for the traditions of elders. It is easy to point fingers at the Pharisees in the first century. But what about today? Have we not done the exact same thing? The modern religious system has built its own fences. It has created unbiblical traditions that nullify the words of the Brit Hadashah and the Tanakh. Millions are sitting in pews, blindly following dogmas that have absolutely no foundation in the scriptures, completely disconnected from the Hebraic roots of the faith. If we are going to follow the true Yeshua, the Yeshua of the Bible, we must be willing to take a sledgehammer to our own traditions. We must return to the absolute standard of Yahweh's instructions, because anything else is just sinking sand. Visit biologosacademy.com for more Torah Bible resources. Making the Kingdom Great Again, Matthew 5:19. Start with the Bible. Stay with the Bible. I am Mr. Batman, the Dark Knight of Logic, and we are making the kingdom great again by keeping the commandments of Yahweh and teaching others to do the same. Welcome back to BioLogos Academy. I am the Dark Knight of Logic. We have established that Yeshua of Nazareth perfectly passed the Deuteronomy 13 and 18 tests. We have established that the religious elite hated him not because he broke the Torah, but because he took a sledgehammer to their man-made fences. Now, let us bring this into the courtroom and examine the final desperate act of the Sanhedrin, the illegal nighttime trial. Read Matthew 26. The text explicitly states that the chief priests were looking for false evidence against Yeshua so they could put him to death. Why? Why would the supposed experts in the law of Yahweh need to manufacture lies? I want you to use your brain for a moment. Think logically. If Yeshua had actually violated the written Torah, if he had broken the Sabbath, or taught people to worship other gods, they would not have needed a single false witness, would they? They could have simply opened the Tanakh, pointed to the commandment he broke, and legally executed him according to the instructions given to Moses. But they didn't. By what standard did they condemn the Messiah? It certainly wasn't the standard of the Creator. They had absolutely no biblical case. Their logic had collapsed. Their theology was bankrupt. So what did they do when they could not defeat him with the scriptures? They relied on the pagan empire of Rome. They had to shift their religious accusations into fabricated political charges of treason against Caesar, just to get Pilate to execute him. Do you see the massive logical contradiction? The men claiming to be the defenders of Yahweh's law had to partner with a lawless pagan empire to murder the only man who ever kept the Torah perfectly. Their reliance on Rome is the ultimate, undeniable proof that Yeshua was legally innocent of breaking the Torah. Yeshua didn't come to abolish the law. He came to fulfill the prophetic shadow pictures embedded right there in the Torah. He operated on the Creator's timeline, not man's. Look at the irreducible complexity of the feasts of Yahweh: Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits, Shavuot. These are not just ancient Jewish holidays. They are the exact mathematical, chronological blueprint of the Messiah's ministry. Yeshua died on exactly the right day, was buried at exactly the right time, and resurrected exactly when the Torah said the first fruits must be presented. He didn't start a new lawless religion. He demonstrated the perfect, staggering continuity of Yahweh's design. If you reject the Tanakh, you are entirely blind to the prophetic reality of who Yeshua actually is and what he actually accomplished. So, what happened after the resurrection? Did the apostles suddenly abandon the Torah? Did they start a new church that replaced Israel? Absolutely not. That replacement theology is a pagan, post-apostolic corruption that defies all biblical logic. Read the Brit Hadashah. Read the book of Acts. The early believers were known as the Way. They were a sect operating within the framework of the faith of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They continued to keep the feasts. They continued to observe the Sabbath. They were fiercely loyal to the Torah. When Gentiles were grafted in, they weren't told the law was abolished. They were given starting requirements in Acts 15, so they could immediately enter the synagogues and, as the text explicitly states, learn the Torah of Moses every Sabbath. The continuity of the kingdom has never been broken. The ultimate verdict is this: Yeshua is the king, and every kingdom has a constitution. The constitution of Yahweh's kingdom is the Torah. It is eternal, it is valid, and it is the absolute standard for today. Let me ask you, how does the Bible define sin? 1 John 3:4 says sin is lawlessness. It is the rejection of the Torah. Many people today claim to know Yeshua, but they live in active, unrepentant rebellion against his Father's instructions. Do not be found standing before the Creator of the universe, arguing from the shifting, neutral ground of human tradition. Start with the Bible, stay with the Bible, repent of lawlessness, and walk in the true word of life. Visit biologosacademy.com for more Torah Bible resources. Making the Kingdom Great Again, Matthew 5:19.